Oh, I've just been told that I didn't introduce him. Everybody, this is Ken. Ken, this is everybody. Hey, let's hear it for Ken. No, I personally know that Ken has put a lot of time into doing this. He's been working on doing this illusion-based vase or illusion.
Basket illusion vase.
He's told me that 20 times. I just cannot get 3 words together, but that doesn't surprise me anymore. So without any further ado, let's let Ken get started on this presentation.
Ready? Good afternoon. I am Ken Allen, chauffeur right here. And today I am going to show you how to take a chunk of wood and turn it into a basket illusion vase. So there's a lot of steps involved, but I want to let you know that the basket illusion is something that Phil Brown taught me how to do it. The platter you see up on the table was the first platter I did after he taught me how to do this technique. But I'm not the only one. Phil and I are not the only ones in the club that do it. You see the bowl next to it. Kim Nelson made that one. So you can use it for more than platters. You can use it for embellishing bowls. You can use it for vases. It's an embellishment technique, but it does take quite a few steps. Chuck Brown also has used this technique for a number of the items he's wood turned. So I'm going to show you just briefly, I like to make these vases so that they can be used for live flowers or artificial flowers. So the vase I'm going to show you today will have a glass tube insert. I'm going to set this back on the front. Bear with me for a minute. I don't need that right now. So, where do you go? Where do you start? What do you do with this thing? I don't have a spur drive in here now, but the first step would be to put this between centers. And this is just kind of a basic wood turning technique. I'm not going to spend time showing you how to do that. There's several operations along the way that I'm going to tell you about, but not actually demonstrate. If you don't know how to do this, please let me know or any one of our mentors, because a lot of this, we all pretty much know how to do it. I see a question in the audience. The question is, how big is the block of wood? I've started with, it's a 16 quarter wood. This is maple. You can use maple, any hardwood. You want usually a lighter colored wood. 16 quarters, so this is 3.5 inches by 3.5 square and 9.5 inches tall. The end vase will be about 8.25 inches tall, so it gives you enough material to hold it in a 4-jaw chuck. Going from that square to this billet, need to have a tenon on it. And once you have a tenon on it, and again, if you don't know how, let us know. We'll look at you there. The tenon in the chuck, I like to bring the tailstock up because it provides some additional stability, a little bit of safety, and I can actually use this to make sure that it's seated tightly against the chuck, because it's important that the material be registered against the chuck jaws. So by applying a little bit of pressure with the tailstock, I can make sure that it's tight in the chuck. Before I go any farther with this, I want to show you or tell you the steps that I'm going to have to go through to show you how to bead this, how to make this vase. You can see, if you can direct the camera to there, there's about 8 steps that I have to go through for this. First of all is to take this billet of wood and create a vase shape. After that shape is created, I need to bead it. I use the beading tool to create beads on the shape. A part of the shape needs to be cut away between the bands of beads because I like to make it look like the basket is surrounding the wooden vase. So there needs to be a little bit of a profile difference. I'll demonstrate that for you today. Once it's beaded, in order to know how to put the beads on here, I'm using the bead term in 2 different ways. One is the beading around that does a full circumference. The other is beads that will be inked that make it look like a part of a basket woven structure. So once you have the beads on the wood, then you need to use indexing to make pencil marks along here for the subsequent wood burning. The next step then is you need to drill a hole in here. The vase has a hole for the flowers and for the glass tube, and I'm going to demonstrate it for you, but I'm not going to actually turn it. Again, it's an operation that if you don't know how to do it, let me know. Any one of the mentors can probably help you with that operation. Once it's been drawn and parted off of the machine, I'll have to wood burn the beads. The wood burning is what defines the edges of the, I'm going to step aside here to grab the vase, the finished vase here again. Wood burning is required to define the edges of where this matrix of beads are going to be colored as a pattern later on. Once it's burned, you have to ink it. There's a pattern that needs to be established, and you'll have to create a pattern and then follow the pattern to create whatever pattern you've chosen. And there's a bazillion types of patterns out there. Finally, once it's inked, we're done. Take it off, sign it, put a final finish on it, and we then have a basket illusion vase. So the first step I'm going to do is show you how to use a storyboard, because I've had to make multiples of the same thing. The storyboard is coming in very handy. I patterned my storyboard after this vase. This is the first one I turned. So I created a storyboard that will help me recreate these particular dimensions. Is that okay up there, Jerry? Steve? Let's look at the overhead for just a minute. So what I've done is I've created a storyboard. The storyboard shows sort of a half profile of this particular vase. And I took some measurements off of that real vase, and I've marked it on the storyboard at critical dimensions. So I've indicated on the storyboard, if you can zoom in a little bit there, Steve. Jerry, I don't know if you can zoom in. Just wanted to point out that there is a rough dimension and a final dimension. The rough dimension is what's important because I'll use that to define the diameters. The final dimension happens to be what I have for this vase, but it's not as critical because you're going to end up creating the final shape regardless of what the number is on the storyboard. For the storyboard now, in order to do this, I need to define some key dimensions. I'm going to start by just defining the top and bottom. We can physically define this. I need to get my tool. By the way, to get to this round, it's just simply use a spindle roughing gouge to go from the square to the round. It's a standard technique. I'm going to use a Bedan square cross section. You can use any kind of a parting tool. This happens to take away a lot of material at one time. So let me get my pencil marks on here. My mistake. I took this out of the chuck, so when I put it back in, it's not in exactly the same place. I'm going to have to line this first. Say again? Sorry. Spindle roughing gouge. I'm going to set the tool rest so that let's define the standard tool rest height, which means that the cutting edge, if you lay the tool on horizontally, it's along the center line of the line axis. That's what it's running true now. Storyboard lines back on. I'm first going to only define the two ends. What I'm going to do is simply cause a physical end to be defined because the pencil marks might go off later, be turned off later. I'm using a Bedan for this, but we could use a narrower parting tool if you needed to. As you can see on this particular use, the groove is getting pretty deep. If you don't give yourself a little extra relief, I go according to half of the tool. Oops, you don't want to do that either. When using the parting tool into a thick piece of wood, you might give yourself some relief like that. One only accident I've ever had at the lathe is when I was using a thin parting tool, did not realize that if you put it in far enough, the friction develops heat. Heat causes metal to swell, also causes wood to swell. They're both swelling in opposite directions, and what happened was it pinched the parting tool, pulled it down, and pulled my thumb into the tool rest. I had a rubber black and blue thumb for a long time, but I was lucky that it didn't break the skin. But I learned my lesson. You do want to always give yourself some extra relief when you're using the parting tool. Now I've got the ends defined. I need to define some critical dimensions. What I have defined here, oops, lost my pencil. Is it overhead? The narrowest part of the neck is about right here. The widest part is in the belly about right here. And down at the base, I have a base diameter and the first bead diameter that are different. So now, with those lines defined, I need to come up with the actual dimensions. For that, I will use a ruler and a caliper. So the largest diameter is 3 5/16. So that happens to be the same diameter that I have as the maximum here now. So next would be the end would be about 2 inches. So again, I would then use the bedan, part down to 2 inches. Again, I'm just showing you things that are standard wood turning for right now. So I'm going to stop at that point, and through the magic of prior preparation, if you don't know how to do this, let me know, or one of our mentors. In the interest of time, because I do have a lot of steps to go through here. I need to find my Chucky. Got the next stage is already on a chuck. So again, through the magic of prior preparation, you end up with a vase shape. Now is what I want to show you. This is where we start the beading process. And I need the storyboard again. We'll start at the base. And for my design, I've already predefined that I'm going to do 19 beads down here because it brings it up about to the midpoint of the belly. And for the neck band, I'm going to do 7 beads. Well, the bottom beads are defined by where I've already turned the base. The top, though, I need to mark where to start. So I'm going to mark it about there. And we'll come back to that mark later. The beading tool I have two different beading tools here. They both do the same thing. And you can see, are we on the camera here? Right there. You see they have an angle. Might need to come back. There you go. They have a flute, and you put the points of the flute into the wood. These are actually scrapers. Now, show the front view here. This one is an Ashley Isles brand, and this is a D-Ray brand. They're both good brands. They both have good material, but they are also slightly different diameter widths. The D-Ray is an actual 1/8 of an inch. The Ashley Isles is advertised as a 3 millimeter, but in fact it measures as 4 millimeters, and the 1/8 of an inch is a little over 3.5 millimeters. So if you're trying to turn using both tools, you end up getting mismatched beads. I'm going to use the Ashley Isles today. By the way, if there are any questions, you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. I'll try to answer them. I will. Comment was, are you going to put your tailstock on? Yes. I do like to use the tailstock whenever possible, because it provides stability and a little bit of safety. And since I'm going to actually need to drill this later on, there's another advantage. By using that point, I now know where the center line is on this end of the vase. So now the key part of doing the beading is to get the tool rest adjusted right so that the bead, and I'm going, bear with me a moment, I'm going to use a shorter tool rest because the beading tool needs to be presented to the wood perpendicular to the wood. Well, on this curved shape, where is the perpendicularity? It changes constantly. So the tool rest is going to have to change with it. In order to turn this right, I need to adjust it so that the tool will be presented at or just below the center line. We have, can you look on camera 3? Can you see that the tool angle is such that this will be presented at the center line? I recently read an article about beading from actually Woodturning magazine out of the UK, and he was suggesting you have the tool about 1/2 inch above center line. Well, this is a scraper. You have to be below center line with a scraper, and my experience of beading above there is it causes tear out. So I start at the center line, and as I bead, I'll raise the handle a little bit, and I'm watching carefully for the shape and the curls to make sure that I'm actually cutting the best I can, scraping without tear out. That's the object, at least. Let me start here. I'll start beading. For beading, also, there's a very popular man who does a lot of basket illusion platters and other objects, and he said on a video recently he goes at 2,400 RPM. I tried that, and the beads would burn. So what works best for me is between 1,200 and 1,500 RPM. So today I'm going to be somewhere in that range. First thing I'll do is just let the points define where these beads are going to be. I'm just barely touching the points. You see the little tiny shavings that are coming out. So it's actually cutting, which is good. So there I'm almost to the point where I'm doing the tail rest. I'm sorry, the toe rest again. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beads. Did you do the toe rest again? What did I say? 19 beads? Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 beads. So 5 more beads. Now there's my 19 beads for the base. Before I forget to do it, what helps to shape the bead properly and consistently is to put a pencil mark on each of these that I'm going to be furthering the bead in the middle in a couple minutes. When the pencil line goes away, stop. That way you know that each bead should have been turned by exactly the same amount. Let me note these before I forget. Looking up. Yeah, take them away. Actually, I might be able to do that. Oh. Oops. It's a demo, right? However, I am going to be removing material, so I can get rid of that last bead, and I'll attempt to do so. But for now, I need to continue the beading process, and before I go to the neck, I'm going to go ahead and turn the beads here on the base. Again, the object is to go until the pencil line disappears. But now use this handle. I have to periodically stop and look because sometimes, oh, I burned that first bead. So I'm going to actually turn down the speed a little bit because it's hard to get that burn out of there. And to do so, I'm going to have to turn that bead again, but I'm going to slow the speed. That lightened it a little bit. I'm going to move on. The next one. Notice the nice, smooth, thin angel hair curls coming off of it. That's a good sign. As I'm introducing us to the hair, I'm both raising the handle and pushing a little bit forward, but I don't want to push too hard. That's why I burned that first bead. It's nice to see all those angel hair. As you can see, it takes a little time to get ready. But for me, I have a card extra time. Again, I'm going to move the tool just a little bit. And I have to stop it because there are some pencil lines left on some of these beads. So if you have that speed change is because I simply against the control bar. Yeah, one thing I did not mention initially is that you want to rock the tool gently left and right, just with the fingers. So I'm just holding on there and rolling the thumb and fingers to rock a little bit left to right. I don't know if you can see that. Just a simple motion. If you do get the beading tool aligned perpendicular to the surface of the wood, what will happen is you'll get an uneven bead. So it'll be a bit deeper on one side than on the other. You can probably get away with that, but it doesn't look as good. I have to stop periodically because I am leaving some pencil marks here. Fortunately, this takes time. I was going to continue this process all the way up, but in the interest of time, I'm going to start on the neck band next. A question in the back of the room.
Can you talk to us about sharpening?
Yes, the question is, can I talk about sharpening the beading tool? Yes. I was uncertain because when I got the Ashley Isles tool, it was pretty sharpened and had an angle that was different than it is now. And I sharpened it by using a CBN or diamond hone, but I was never quite satisfied with it. When I went to the AAW symposium, I bought a D-ray tool, and I noticed on the D-ray tool that there's a slight concavity there. So I asked them, well, how do I sharpen this? And they said, well, all you need to do is set it on a platform against your grinder, and without turning the grinder on, roll your wheel past the end of the tool. That's just enough. It's like honing it, but there's a concavity here, so it matches the radius of the CBN wheel. And I've done that, and it does make it sharp. Once I learned how to do that for the D-Ray, I changed the angle on my Ashley aisles to match, and it turns out, if you can see those, it turns out this is on a 60-degree platform. It's just the perfect angle for the D-Ray tool. So I've made both of these tools now so that I can sharpen it with the CBN wheel on a 60-degree platform. We don't want to come back and do anything to the flutes. It would get rid of, there might be a small bowl in there. You don't need to do anything with the flutes. And if you do this technique with the CBN wheel, you don't want to come back with a hone because that would be a flat surface against the concave surface. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Let me continue and show you how to do the neck. It's very similar. You can see that the angle is a little bit different, so it's going to be a little bit more tricky to follow the angle up in the neck area. So first, I'll define just the points. I should have 7. In this case, I'll put 7, not 8. There's 4, 5, 6, and 7. The pencil line on each one. Pausing here because it looks like the indicator monitoring a bit. So we need to look into the sensor on this machine. Changing as I go along. And so I don't have quite a good shape. If you turn the beads like this and it chatters, that's a bad sign because that chattering is going to tear out the hair. And as if it's chattering, that means I'm too far above the center line. So you need to raise the handle to the center line. There's 2 more here. There's the last one. In order to show you the next step, I need to come back here and turn these last couple of beads. So bear with me for a moment while I get those in mind, because the next step is to remove material between these two sets of beads. The reason is you want these beads to seem proud of the surface of the wood, because that's what makes it look like something has been added to the outside of the vase, and that's my objective. So let me turn these, I'll turn one of these, number 19. All for my purposes today for this demo. So the next step is, as I just said, I need to turn away the material between these bands and above the neck band. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do now. We'll go back to standard tool rest height. So because I needed the beading tool to be a little bit lower with the tool rest. Standard tool rest height is about there. I am going to take off this number 20 bead. So let me make sure my count was right again. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That is 20. So I will take off the 20th bead. Side. So I have to do the same thing. You can see that it has defined a difference in height, so that's what gives the third dimension here to give it the sense that this is added to the surface of the wood. Now I need to get the profile back together to continue the shape. It was more speed control knob. If I had perfect tool control, I wouldn't have any tool marks left. But I don't have perfect tool control. So I found that smoothing this out with a negative rate scraper helps save me time and give me a better final curvature shape here. now you can see I've removed enough material, and I could shape this a little bit more, but in the interest of time, I won't. But it now is giving it the impression that the basket material is on the surface of this, the surface of the vase. Have to do the same thing up at the top. What I'm using for this is simply a spindle tool, or spindle gouge. Just turn the material down to the bottom edge of that bead. I'm estimating where the bottom edge is. In this case now, I want to smooth the tool the neck of this vase. And I will again use negative X paper to some of my tool marks. I'm going to finish this. Oh my gosh, we've got some curls there. I have to do just another pass here. So we're going to finish this and trying to get the day. Of course, I have to do the rest of the beads. And I would sand this part of material to 320 grit. There's not a whole lot of need to sand the beads themselves, and you want to be careful not to sand the beads too much because you'll end up getting rid of the curvature. You'll flatten those beads, and it'll be obvious. It's not a good visual look for a basket illusion object. The next thing, bear with me for a moment, make sure I haven't skipped any steps. Next thing I need to do is actually clean off a lot of this debris, and unfortunately I don't have a vacuum cleaner here today, because the next step is to wire burn between the beads. The wire burning helps to give a shadow between the beads that again helps to accentuate the fact that it's something on the surface of the wooden vase. Because it's burning, there is a fire hazard. What I use for wire burning is I have a set of these wire burning tools. They have a handle on the end. I think I got this from, I believe it's Ron Brown's Best. You can make your own wire burners. You can make them of various thicknesses, but for me it was easiest to just pick it up commercially. To do the wire burning, and get your tool rest out of the way. Again, at home I vacuum off all the small stuff because I don't want to take a chance for any kind of fire. For the wire burning, I typically go about 1800 RPM. And the process is fairly simple. You lay it in a groove, you give it an angle, you apply a little bit of pressure, and you continue that until it starts to smoke. And you're done. Move to the next one. With the smoke, you're done. But once you've done all the beads, you want to look carefully to see if it's fairly uniform from every bead trough to the next, because you can end up overburning one, underburning something else. You want it to be as uniform as possible. So I'm going to burn a few of those beads. I don't think the speed sensor is operating correctly. Smoke, stop, go down, smoke, stop. That's as far as I'm going to go for the demo, but you see the process. It's not difficult and it doesn't take very much time, but by looking at the difference between the beads that have not been burned and the beads that have been burned, it makes it stand out a little bit more. So visually, it's a good thing to do. I'm going to move on to the next step. Even though this isn't fully beaded, the next step is to put index marks on here. As I said earlier, the index marks are what will define the lines between the beads. So to do that, I have to put some other equipment on here. Bear with me a moment while I get this set up. What I'm going to put on first is simply a platform to give me a surface in which to put a pencil holder. I don't like the platform to move on me, so a simple spring clamp holds it on the ways. Not critical. The key thing that has to be applied here is this is an indexing wheel. Now this particular wheel is simply a polagraph paper. You can go online and download software. You can define how many rays, how many lines. There's a lot of parameters that you can adjust. For what I've done so far, I've identified 72 rays per circumference. And that can be then divvied up into every other piece is 36 rays around the circumference. And it turns out 36 gives a good size of bead for this size of object. For the platter that I've displayed on the table up here, it's 72 beads around. This indexing ring needs to go on the headstock underneath the chuck. It simply fits on here and the chuck holds it in position. But I also need to have some way to know where I'm at on that ring. Can you show this on the end? There you go. By positioning this reference surface, I can rotate the index ring to any one of these rays. Let me get this adjusted a little bit. So you can see I've simply hand numbered 1 through 72 for this. I'm going to start at 72, which is in essence 0, and clamp it in place. This is a pencil holder, and you can see that I've adjusted the height of the pencil point to be in the center line of the lathe. Moving that toward the end, you can see it's at the center of this particular lathe. My lathe actually, where are we at? My lathe is an 1840, this is a 1640, so my pencil has to be an inch higher than shown here. So the process here is simply, we've got the cameras in the right place. Draw a line, and draw a line. Rotate, in this case, I'm going 2 of the segments, because I want 36, not 72. Draw a line, draw a line. Move to the next one. Draw a line, draw a line. I think you get the point. It takes at least 10 minutes to draw all the lines around one circumference. I'm not going to do that. I think you get the idea. Are there any questions about the indexing part of this process? I don't see any questions, so let me take this away and we'll move on. We'll move on to the next phase. So we have now index marked on the chart over here. That's item 4. Next is to drill and part this off. But I need to remove all of this equipment, the indexing equipment, for just a moment. I like to take the indexing ring off before I do other operations because it's a piece of plastic, big disc, and it could possibly cut me if I lean into it inadvertently. So for safety reasons, I take that off. We have index marks on there. The next step is to drill this out. Let's see if I can get this on the overhead. Move it up here. The glass tube that I'm using has a flange on the top. And when it goes into the vase, I want that flange to stop on a shelf. So I've figured out that if I use a 1 1/4 inch Forstner bit, 5/8 of an inch deep, it will create that shelf where I want to hold this glass tube. That will be one part of the operation. The other part is to drill the rest of the hole. And for that, I'm going to use a 1 inch diameter twist drill bit. Let me set this up just to show you how I would set it up. I have a Forstner bit and a Jacobs chuck. Jacobs chuck has a number 2 Morse taper so that it can go into the tailstock. So I would insert that in the tailstock, position this, and again, this is an operation I'm going to tell you about but not actually do in the interest of time. I would drill this in by turning on to about 300 RPM and cranking this in until my reference surface is, in this case, 5/8 of an inch is about the middle of the black line on this particular drill bit. So I would pre-drill that amount. that creates the flange surface. But I still need to drill a deeper hole. And for that, I found that using a Jacob's chuck and a 1-inch diameter drill bit doesn't work very well because they don't make the drill bits long enough to fit into the Jacob's chuck. So I've opted to purchase a 1-inch diameter drill bit that has an inner-tube Morse taper on it. And this works very well because it is long enough and there's no additional diameter obstructions for going into the vase. I already have a piece of blue tape on here as a reference. I want this hole to be about 1/4 of an inch or so longer than the glass tube, simply because when I drop it in there, I don't want it to bottom out inside. I want it to bottom out on the flange surface. The drilling process is simple. Bring it up to the end, you crank it for some amount, back it out, clear out the flutes. Now, just like I was explaining with the parting tool and the heat, the wood built up in the flutes and the metal surface heats up and expands inside the wood. And if you don't clear it frequently, that will expand. You can actually burn the wood, both the chips, the curls coming out. And I have overdone it at least once, and it was very difficult to get the drill bit out of the wood. There was enough expansion of the materials that it was very difficult to remove it. So for the vases that I've made recently, what I've done is I've advanced about 1 inch, bring it back out, clear off the flutes, and in some cases I've used some paraffin on the flutes just as additional lubricant. And if you do that, you'll find out it melts the paraffin very quickly. So there's a lot of heat that's generated in here. Again, this is an operation that if you need some assistance in figuring out how to actually do this, let me know, or contact one of our mentors. It's a simple drilling process, and all you have to do is pretty much what I've just described. Are there any questions about the drilling process? Once you've drilled it, you need to turn. We'll have a hole in here, 2 holes, the flange support and the 1-inch diameter hole. And what I'll do then is, look at the top here. I'll turn just with a gouge, bowl gouge or spindle gouge, a taper inside so that the taper sort of matches, comes down to the edge of the flange on the glass tube. I'm not going to do that part. At this point, we've shaped the vase, beaded the vase, adjusted the shape between the beads, wire bond, put index marks on it, drilled it. So the next step would be to part it off and just use the standard parting tool and clean up the bottom of the vase. And then it's ready for the next operation. Next operation is going to be wood burning the beads. Well, for that, I'm going to move to the table, work table. And so this is a good point for you to take a break. The next step that needs to be done is I have here that has been turned. The area between the beads has been reshaped. The end The end has been shaped so it comes down to the edge flange. We're adjusting the sound there just a little bit. And if you can see in the overhead, zoom in a little bit. This has been index marked. These are all pencil lines along every one of these edges of the beads. So the next step is to wood burn each of those lines for each of those beads. Now, there happen to be about 693 beads in this one vase. So I'm not going to show you the entire vase, but I will show you the operation. But first I want to show you what this is wood burned with. Let's see, can you zoom in a little bit on the tip of this? I'll move it if I can. Okay. Maybe I need a clear piece of paper instead of this pad. That's a little better. This is a special wood burn tip that is a basket illusion tip. It has a flat surface here. It comes down to a flat, but what's key is that the points have been rounded so that it will fit directly over top of a bead. So there's a special tool that you need for this type of operation. And I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of the wood burning. I like to set up, I'm glad there's a bit of a breeze here, but I usually set up a small fan to blow the smoke away from it. Question in the back. I'm sorry, repeat that? Where do you get the special pins? I purchased an extra recently. It's an Optima model PH21AEF. Unfortunately, I don't remember what company I just purchased this from, but I can give you that information later. This is made by Optima, and I believe there are some other companies that also make basket illusion tips, but I continued with this one because when Phil Brown introduced me to this technique, he had one of these and he sent me to a local man, Larry Cornwell, who lives in Prescott, who sells these. So I purchased it from him. And for this replacement, rather than going to Larry this time, I found an online source. Does that answer your question? I'll get definitively later. Yes, Phil? I couldn't hear that. Oh, the comment is that the Larry Cornwell has moved and is no longer available for purchasing these. So your only source is one of the online sources. That's good to know. Thank you, Phil. Now, the wood burner I'm going to be using today is a Burnermaster. This happens to be the one that I received as a gift a couple of years ago. Thank you, lovely wife. It's a single unit. We also have a double unit, so we have two wood burners attached at the same time. It hasn't mattered to me if I need a different wood burner tip. I simply change it out very quickly. The tips on other brands may require an adapter between the cable and the pin. Some of them, these are usually RCA connections. Some of them have a male and female connection, some will be a female connection, and a female to female won't work, but they sell short adapters. It's a standard RCA adapter. For this operation, I'm going to turn on the wood burner, and it has a variable speed, a variable temperature control knob here. I don't know if you can see that. And I don't have a specific number that I dial in each time. It's probably around a 4 or 5. But what I like to do is make sure I have the right temperature by using a, if we can do the overhead here. I just have an 1/8-inch diameter piece of dowel rod. And I will turn it up to a temperature, and I will make a few impressions on here to see if it's the right temperature. So that's at about 5 on this scale. You can get it way too hot. I just turned it up to max. You can see it's glowing. And you can see that it burns. And sometimes it'll actually flame up. So you want to adjust your temperature to be about where you want it to be consistent with each burn. This temperature now looks about right to me, and you see I burned through that with that higher temperature. So now the process is to simply start at some line and follow that line. Before I go there, one other thing to note on here, again, can you zoom in on the pin itself? There's an angle to it. You see it doesn't come straight off of the pin. The reason for that is you want to present the end of this directly and perpendicular to the wood. But where I'm holding it is at sort of an angle. It's more awkward to try to present it straight on. So the manufacturer has put, I don't know, it's maybe about a 30-degree curve into it. And that angle then helps to sort of an ergonomic assistance for me. And the process is you pick a line. Am I on screen there? You just follow, and all you do is press it. I push it in, and it only takes about a half to 1 second. I try to get a consistent burn for every one of these bead lines. You can see that this is a repeated process. You get one line burn, and you rotate to the next one. Burn that whole line.
And how many bottles of beer do you go through when you're doing that?
In my case, none.
What was the question?
That was the question was, how many bottles of beer I go through?
Beer, 4 bottles of wine, about 3 bottles.
We're getting some snide comments from the audience now. It takes patience. It takes a lot of patience. I typically don't drink when I'm doing this because I don't want to get off. In fact, just right here, if you can zoom in on these two beads right here, you can see that just by distracting my attention, you see that I'm off this line a little bit with these other beads. So I'm not too worried about that because this is supposed to be a hand-woven basket. They're not perfect. This is not a machine-made item. And so I try to be as straight as possible, but I don't worry about it too much. However, there was one platter that I did that I got off so significantly, I couldn't do the pattern that I had planned. I had to create a whole new pattern to hide that angled line, and I painted it black so that I would camouflage my mistake. Fortunately, it turned out very well, and somebody liked it because they bought it. But there's nothing really like it. It was right. So anyway, you can see that this process does take patience, and for doing one of these vases, I believe I said 936 beads here. It takes me about 2 or 3 hours to go around the entire vase, base, and neck. If you want to stick around for the next 2 or 3 hours, I don't know. So, we get the idea. That's what you have to do for every one of the on here. Fortunately, once again, through the magic of preparation, I have another vase that has been beaded all the way around and burned. So this vase is ready for the next step, which is inking. But before I get into the inking, I want to talk a little bit about patterns, because from the platters you saw, there's different patterns that can be done. And for the platters, I would print out a polar graph paper and then use colored pencils to mark in a pattern and use different colors, different patterns until I was satisfied with something before I ever started to ink the platter. For the vase, it's similar. I want a pattern first. I want to know what colors I need. What pattern do I want to do? And to create a pattern, this does not lend itself to a polar graph paper as well as a platter does. Although you can use polar paper, but it turns out a trick that I credit Chuck Brown for telling me about is to use a spreadsheet, because it's a rectangular pattern here. And a spreadsheet will let you create a pattern, and you can use the computer itself to change the colors. So I have a short PowerPoint presentation to show you how that's done. Chuck, can you pull that up, please? Okay, we call this just a pattern selection technique. Next slide. And yes, 936 beads on this vase. You could just color it randomly if you want, but I don't think that would turn out really looking very good. So I prefer to come up with a pattern ahead of time. The pattern must match, since this is a continuous circle. If you start on one side and your pattern coming around doesn't match, it's not going to look very good. So you need to have the pattern match all around the circle. I like the pattern because you may get disrupted while you're doing this. It takes a while to ink these. And you may need to look at reference pattern to figure out where did you stop, what comes next. You could lose your place. You want to make sure that the colors you use match the colors of pins that you have. And I'll get into this in a minute. But we have different colors of the ink pens. We will use the same pattern again on other items. So it helps to make a pattern. So how do you make that pattern? Next, please. As I said, polar graph paper works well for platters, but it could work for a vase or a rectangular pattern like this, but better is a spreadsheet. Next, please. So for the spreadsheet, we can number the columns to match the number of beads around the circumference. We can number the rows to equal the number of beads in the base and in the neck. We can resize the spreadsheet cells so they look somewhat square or rectangular if you want. But I then print a border around each cell. Next slide, please. You may have noticed on that previous slide that there's some additional lines on there, solid dark lines and double lines and dotted lines. The reason is that splits up this 36 bead pattern into multiples. So you can see that you can make a segment and repeat that segment. You could do 2 segments around, 3, 4, or 6 segments around. So it just gives a visual clue that the colored bands are just simply to highlight that you can do various patterns. Next, please. The way you create the color in here depends on the spreadsheet you're using, and I use Microsoft Excel. What you can do is right-click in one of the cells, and it pulls up, it's hard to see in the back of the room, but it pulls up a pull-down menu, and you can ignore that part. We want to instead focus on what's up there with a little bucket that's tilting over. That's the fill option, fill color option. And if you hit the little, with left click the down arrow, it'll pull up a color palette. And you can select a color. Then go back to the cell and left click in that cell and it will fill that color. So you can see I've started to color in some red, yellow, and I believe that's blue. That's how you can create colors in your pattern. Next slide. You've seen this vase today as a demonstration for me. We've focused, well, I'm sorry, the audience can see, but that's okay. I'm showing the original vase, it's blue and green. This is the pattern that I used for this first vase. And I don't know if you can show that on Zoom or not, but we'll move on here. Anyway, this is the actual pattern. You can see I chose three segments in this case. Next slide, please. For this demo, I started playing around with some 4-segment patterns. Here's one with some red lines. Next, please. Other colors. Next, please. Same pattern, playing around with different colors. So you have a lot of options to do this. Next, please. Now, you don't have to have that particular pattern. You can come up with all sorts of other patterns if you wish. Next, please. We can come up with some ugly looking patterns. I don't particularly like this one. Next, please. You can come up with some fun patterns. How about little banditos around your base? Next, please. I actually settled on this pattern for the demo today. So that's the pattern I'm going to demonstrate for you next. Next, please. In summary, create a spreadsheet, number the rows and the columns. Use the spreadsheet fill color option to test the various patterns, and you can change those colors at will. When you're satisfied with it, print out a one-page copy of that. Refer to that printed copy to do the pattern, and then create your pattern and enjoy it. Thank you. That's the end of the slide presentation. Bear with me 1 minute. I need to get my pattern. I forgot to bring that up to the table with me. So this is the pattern that I'm going to try to demonstrate for you now. And you can see that it has the base band on the bottom part of the spreadsheet and the neck band on the top part. So the colors I'm going to need for this will be some browns, red, yellow. It turns out for some lighter colors, like yellow, I find that painting it white first brightens the color significantly. Now there's some blue in this one. So I'm going to start with something, decide where do I want to define as the starting point. Well, there happens to be a nice grain pattern here, so I'll say that belly, this is going to be the middle of the front. I call it the front. It doesn't much move. It's one of four sides. And if you look at the pattern, it looks like this red dot in the middle would be a good place to start, because I want to have a reference point for all of the patterns, all the segments around. So in order to paint this and make sure I don't screw up, I like to start with just a dot on one of the patterns. I'm going to change to this other red pen. So now if I look at the pattern, let's assume this is the starting point. I'm going to count for that. It comes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And from the bottom, it should also be 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So taking the front here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I put a little dot and check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that worked. Now, since I have red in my hand, I'll continue the red pattern. And it looks like there's the 1, 2, 3, 4 down and 1, 2, 3, 4 up, including counting this middle. I will have another red dot. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now from there, the pattern is up and over one, up and over one. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 in that direction. So there's 3 up and over one. And now it goes back the other way, up and back over the other way, and one up and over and back to the top. Now doing the same thing on the other side, down and over, down and over. Go 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 3, so down and over one more, and then come back and connect the dots. Now you wonder, well, why are these dots? Well, that's because if you make a mistake, you need to scrape off the mistake before you color it the correct color. It's easier to get off the pattern than you may believe. And so to correct a mistake, it helps to use a hobby knife, an X-Acto knife or something equivalent. And I don't know if you can see it. What you would do is hold the knife so it's perpendicular to the wood and simply scrape it off. And if it's a hard wood, you may get away with it without destroying much of the wood. A soft wood like an aspen or others, you may be scraping away a lot of wood. And so it's best to avoid mistakes. Yes, there's a question in the audience. Just a minute, Phil, who's bringing the microphone.
On the pattern sheet, what I do that helps me out is I count down like you counted down 10. I write that on the sheet And each one of those different colors, in that color, I'll write how many that is. So I don't have to go back and recount every time in order to keep my pattern straight. And it helps me be more organized.
The comment there is he writes on the pattern itself the numbers, so you don't have to count each time. You already know that number. So, yes, another question.
Yeah, obviously your number of rows is determined on your pattern. So you do your pattern first, which tells you how many rows you have to complete that pattern.
That one is sort of chicken and egg answer. It depends. If you have pre-termed a specific number of rows on your item, you want to match the pattern to that number of rows. If you've created the pattern first, then you're going to have to make sure that you can create that number of rows on the item. What I typically do is in this case, for what I've demonstrated today, I used a specific pattern and I decided that I needed 19 rows. So that's why I came up with 19 rows on each one of them. That now matches the pattern. So again, you can go either direction, either way, but it depends on the piece that you're actually working to.
It seemed like the pattern fit.
There's another question.
What type and brand of pens are you using?
Thank you. I was intending to tell you that. I have forgotten to do so. You can use, if you wish, you could use things like Prismacolor or Sharpies, or Prismacolor will work as well as these. Sharpies will fade over time. You don't really want to use a Sharpie. But I was taught, and again, I thank Phil Brown for this, the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen is a colored India ink. The India ink is waterproof, fade resistant, archival quality, UV resistant. So the color you put on with the Faber-Castell pen is the color you're going to end up with, hopefully, years down the road. That's the kind that I prefer. And there may be other brands out there, but I haven't tried any of the others. I've been happy with these. I'm sorry. Ken, did you get it? Yes, question.
Because certain woods, the texture in the wood will accept finish at different depths. Do you ever put a weakened diluted sealer on first for consistency of color?
The question is, have I used a sealer first? And the answer is no. I have thought about doing that because, for example, this first base that I did is aspen. It's a much softer wood than the maple, and it does soak in to the wood. And I considered doing, just as you suggest, using some kind of a sanding sealer or some kind of a sealer first. I simply have not tried that yet. Another question. Over here.
Do you use a seal coat over everything? You probably don't use a rub-on. You don't want to smear, or you spray coat?
You're asking about the final finish?
Final.
Yes. What I do is I use a spray lacquer as the final finish. I have resisted using something like a wipe-on poly because my concern is that I might fill the grounds with the poly. That's probably going to show some light or maybe even white material, which I think would detract from the pattern and the overall look. A spray lacquer is thin enough that it will coat everything in those crevices, and it still protects the wood and it protects the ink from, not from fading because it won't fade, but from wear. Yes, another question.
Just going back to the question about putting on a pre-sealer. The artists that do chalk drawings and charcoal drawings and stuff like that use a product called Fix It. And you can put any kind of a finish over the top of it. It sticks on anything. And if I'm going to pre-seal it, that's the product I would use.
Yes, I'm not sure. There are different brand names for what we refer to as Fix-It. I've seen that you can get spray cans of fixative of some sort. It's used in the art world for covering charcoal drawings, for example, and it protects the charcoal from smudging. I'm sure it could be used on this just as well. Yes.
Ken, on your diagram there, you have a lot of white spots on that.
Yes.
Do you color those white or do you leave those natural wood?
I leave those natural wood.
Okay.
However, in the final product, you'll see I have on this pattern, I have some white around the yellow. I did paint that white. I inked it white. Simply because I liked the way it stood out. What actually happened in that case is because it was yellow, and as I previously said, the yellow will be brighter if I first ink it with white. I did the white first, then I did the yellow, and I liked the white left behind. So you'll see that in the final product. Actually, I'll bring it out now. That's the final product with this particular pattern.
Nice.
And can you see the white spaces around the yellow from that angle? The rest of it, as you can see, is light brown. Where it's white on the pattern, it's a light brown. At one point, I actually filled in a light brown on the pattern, but it seemed distracting, so I simply don't do that. I just go for the primary colors that I want in the pattern. Other questions? Those are some good questions. Thank you. I think you can see that it takes a while to do this pattern, and yet I'm a long ways from being done with this pattern. I need to do some white because I have yellow. So for the yellow, it's going to be the next space over from the middle white, or the middle red. And as I just described, I want white on these other 4 points. Are we on screen there? Okay. And I have a blue that needs to be inked on there. Where did my blue go? So from the pattern, I can tell that I just follow the red outline, except I don't go to the very end. So I can do blue, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4 down, 4. And down here again, 1, 2, 3, 4 up. Down over, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then repeat that pattern down here. So I've defined 3 different colors here so far. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to do the brown. Well, I'll show you a couple of browns. It's simple to do because it's at the top of the very center. So it'll be a brown up here and a brown down here. And it's, again, down 1, over 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it's going to go down over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the next row down will be down 2 for each of these. And there I made a mistake. Should be there, but 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5. So again, I get to demonstrate that your attention wanders and you get to do some extra work. So I would have to come back here and scrape that clean. Fortunately, that scraped pretty clean right away. I'm not going to continue the dot part of the pattern. I'm going to start with some of how do you fill in the rest of it, because this too takes a little bit of effort and time. So for the red, I usually start with, you may have noticed, you may have or may not have, where'd my other red go? Here it is. I usually have 2 of the same color. And the reason is they start out, let's see if we can get, start out as a nice point, but with time, they blunt because we're scraping against wood. It does have a rough surface and it blunts. So I try to preserve the sharp point as long as possible because you'll see in a minute why I need to have that sharp point. So I start by using the blunt tip to ink in the pattern for the bigger solid parts. And this takes patience. And I'm going to save you some time here eventually, but we need to get to the point where I'm ready to use the sharp point for this. So you can see that this has now created the red part of the pattern. But there's a lot of brown showing through there too. So I have to use a sharper point now, and I tilt it at an angle so I can get the sharper point in on the top surface. Try to fill it in, because it's going to look a lot better if it's a solid color all the way through. Well, that did the top surface, except for this one in the middle, I missed it. But now I have to turn it around, because I need to do the bottom surfaces. The object here is to try to get the complete bead painted or inked. Was there a comment from the audience?
Charge about $10,000.
$10,000, we would charge $10,000 an hour. Well, I wish I could be paid that much.
How long do those sharp points last, Ken?
That depends on how rough you are with it. I try to preserve them as long as possible. One good thing about these Sharpies, this is the brush version of the Sharpie. When it does get really dull, you can take a pair of tweezers or pliers, pull this out, and reverse it. There is a sharp point on the inside of this, so you can get extra life out of it. Once you've done both of those, you're done. Because I have tried multiple ways to trim the ends of these. It's always blunt. You can never get back to a good sharp point. Question?
Ken, how fast does the ink set up? Can you get it like on your hand and then transfer it around, or?
No. The question is, how long does this ink stay wet? The answer is it dries almost instantly. And no, there's not unlike an acrylic or some paints, I don't have to worry about touching it again because it will not transfer. It's dry very quickly. I believe part of the reason is it's a fairly thin ink. It soaks into the grain right away, and whatever solvent they use in here evaporates very quickly. Other questions? But with that, I could continue inking this, and you could continue sitting there for a while I do so. But I think you see the point. The process is not difficult, but it is time consuming. It takes patience. It takes some attention to detail. One thing I did not show you is oftentimes, in fact, most of the time, I will wear magnifying glasses to make sure that I'm seeing what I'm inking. Because you do not want to ink across and touch the adjacent bead with a color, unless it's already that color. Because then you get out the X-Acto knife and scrape it away. And some of these would be very difficult to get into the groove to scrape it away. With that, I think, unless there are any specific questions, are there any questions?
Are there any questions that anybody have?
Then I want to point out one final thing. And I will see if I can get it up again. I have prepared a handout. I only brought about 4 copies of it here today, but what I will do, and this handout describes all the steps I've demonstrated today. I will ask Marge to send this handout to everybody by email.
Actually, newsletter that comes out next week.
Yes, I was also going to mention that the instructions, this handout is already in the newsletter that's going to go out, Kathy says, at the end of the week. So you'll be getting it perhaps from 2 different sources. So look for your email. If you are not going to be around for the email and you want a paper copy, I have a few copies here. The other thing to mention is, as Rick said at the beginning of the demonstration, I'm going to be doing a Tuesday demo at our house. I can give you the address, but as Rick suggested, it's in the roster too. Tuesday, what time do we meet? 9 o'clock for the demo. Gives time for Tuesday breakfast and people to travel to our house. We live in Prescott Valley in the Pronghorn Ranch subdivision. At the Tuesday demo, this is going to be a hands-on Tuesday demo. I'm going to demonstrate for you firsthand beading and indexing. With the index, I have the index wheel set up, the indexing stuff, and wood burning and inking. So you can do any one or all of those operations, but I encourage you to come by and don't be shy, do it. There's only one way for you to find out if this is something that you would really like to do. If you've got the patience for it and you want to try it, come Tuesday and give it a try. I'll have several stations set up so people can be working at different stations at the same time. So I hope to see you there on Tuesday. So are there any final questions?
I'm going to be there Tuesday. Show of hands. Who's going to be there? Great. I think it'll be well worth the trip going over there.
There's a question in the back here. Yes, Larry. The question is, how do you index a platter? Exactly the same as I did for this. The only difference is, let me grab the platter. It's really easy to simulate this. It uses the same equipment. We would have to have the platter still on the lathe. Platform is down here, you have your pencil. You run the pencil on this side and on this side. Then you rotate to the next degree. Run the pencil this side and this side. And continue to do that with your pencil lines until you've gone all the way around. So it's the same indexing equipment, same process, it's just a different form factor.
Any other questions? How about a big round of applause? That was tremendous demonstration.
Thank you.
Does anybody have a new appreciation when they look at this now? I know I sure do. I see insanity, but